All right, so we are actually moving out of explorers. We're moving from the age of exploration into the world of the colonies. So we're actually going to be talking about today that move to the new world, meaning it wasn't just people that were exploring and trying to see where new places were. This is talking about people that are actually picking up their lives and choosing to move and live somewhere else to stay in that place. I'm not sure. I would imagine several of us have moved sometime in our lives, right? And it's not always the easiest thing to do. It takes a lot of planning and preparation, right? And it was even more so for these people. And we'll talk about that a little bit. But I also want to point out when they talk about moving to the new world, again, the world at this time, let me pull this up too. So, world map. So when they talk about the new world, it's because during this time, like here is Europe and Asia and Africa, right? These are the people that we're focusing on. The people that are moving are here from, mostly coming from Europe. And they called this side of the globe the New World because this was brand new to them. They had never seen any of these places. They didn't know people existed over here. So when we refer to the New World, we're pretty much just talking about the Americas. So let's talk about moving to the New World. So the colonial times began after Christopher Columbus discovered America. And we can kind of debate whether we want to say discovered, right? But that was after Christopher Columbus had went on his journey. And the first settlers began to arrive in the New World around the early 1600s. They came after Columbus and other explorers spread the news about riches and land they had found. So after these explorers go exploring, they come back and, they tell all these great tales, kind of like how Marco Polo's journal inspired people to explore. Christopher Columbus and all these other explorers inspired people to go in search of this new land. The colonial times lasted until the 13 colonies separated from Great Britain, which we just learned about the 13 colonies, and we're going to learn a lot about the 13 colonies. The colonies then became the United States of America. This period lasted from around 1607 to about 1776. And people moved to this new place for a number of different reasons. Reasons for moving are called push and pull factors. So if we think back to when we talked about the motivations for exploring, this is kind of like that. The only difference is these motivations were for people. It wasn't just explorers. These were just like general everyday people, and they're picking up their lives, like I said, to move to another place. And we call those push and pull factors. So people might move from a place because that something pushes them away from their home, meaning like something is not great where they're currently living now. So that place is pushing them to a new place, or something pulls them towards a new place. So maybe where they're living now isn't bad, but the sound of something in that new area is so good, it is pulling them towards it. For example, some people wanted to get away from strict governments in Europe. That would be like a push factor, right? Their current home is pushing them away to this new place. Others wanted religious freedom. When we say religious freedom, it just means they didn't, the place that they were coming from, the country they were coming from, or even the city they were coming from said, this is what you have to believe, and they didn't want to. They wanted to believe in what they wanted to believe. So they looked for a new place to live so they could practice the religion they wanted to. Some people wanted to start their own farms. That's a pull factor, right? The New World is pulling these people in and, showing like we have land here that you could maybe use. Others wanted an adventure and the challenge of a new land. Some were poor and wanted a chance to work for a new life. Others wanted to find new materials to trade with and new people to trade with. So this is kind of a mix of push and pull factors, but there were lots of different reasons why people would want to move to this brand new place. But although there were some good things, right? They had motivations to go. They thought it was going to be great. It was not an easy thing. We talked about how hard it was on the explorers to move. It was really difficult on these people too. They really had no idea what they were kind of getting into. So the trip from Europe took about 2 months by ship, and it was not cheap. So it was extremely expensive for these people to make the trip. Remember when we talked about the explorers, they had sponsorships from royals. These people wouldn't have had sponsorships. They would have had to have just come up with the money on their own. And honestly, a lot of people that wanted to go to the New World couldn't because they couldn't afford to go. But even the people who could afford it did not live in luxury on the journey over. So if you've ever been on like a cruise ship or seen pictures, it was not at all like that. Okay. They had to sleep on the wooden floors of the boat in between other passengers. So imagine like just laying on the floor wherever you are currently with people all around you also laying on the floor, right? There was no way to shower or bathe. So people wore the same clothes the entire trip. So not only are you laying on boards, on top of boards, right up next to other people, but those people haven't bathed or showered in 2 months and are wearing the exact same clothes. Pretty gross, right? On top of that, the only food that they had was things that was going to last. Remember, they didn't have refrigerators or ways to keep food good for a long time, so they had to eat things like over-salted meat because salt helps keep things from spoiling, dried beans and peas, and these dry, really hard biscuits called hardtack. And again, it was just things that wouldn't go bad on that 2-month trip over with. So already starting off, not the easiest trip to get there, right? But obviously these people felt like it was worth it to make that really long journey to come here. But unfortunately, I have more bad news. So even though the trip was bad, they finally get there and they think, okay, it's going to be so much better now. It was a really scary place to live, this new land, when people first got there, especially for those European settlers. So it was hard for them to start settlements and to make new routines. They got used to their old lives and having everything available to them, and this place was not like that at all. Many people didn't know how to survive in this new environment. Some died of diseases, like we had talked about with the Native Americans, because they were also getting introduced, right, to new diseases. Or starvation. This wasn't like they were used to. They couldn't run down the street and go to the market to buy what they needed. There were no markets. It was just you grow or you hunt your own food, and that was the only way that you ate. And a lot of these people didn't have those skills. They didn't know how to do those things. And we already know that the Native Americans were not really fans of the Europeans that were coming over, for good reason, right? But they weren't very happy. So the Native Americans felt like they needed to defend themselves and their land. And so the Native Americans killed some of the Europeans that came over too. However, a handful of determined people were able to find a way to succeed from the beginning. And we're going to talk about some really early settlements here soon and how difficult it really was for them to become successful. But they did. And these settlements paved the way for more and more settlers to come and settlers who would come later. And they would have it much easier than the first peoples that came over. So you can always come back to this lesson if you need to. If not, you're going to head on to the activity that follows on this page.